Okay, so this is going to be a little bit rambly, but somebody had sent up the bat signal with a username mentioned on Reddit for me to assist in answering a guy's question. And it looks like he actually deleted the original question, so I can't read it, but he has some of his replies in here. So while I've got it here, we'll just talk about it. And anybody can just hang out if they want to. The topic is basically about how, I guess, pop style musicians, the kind of people you see at a piano bar or jazz people, those kinds of things, you see them playing a lot of music without sheet music. And basically, the person's question um, was how do they get better at memorizing? Because apparently they sight read well, which fantastic, that's helpful, but they feel like it's holding them back for some of the other things they might want to do, and they don't understand how those people are memorizing so much music so quickly. Here's the deal. They're not. And this is the really important thing, is that people need to understand that the way that they are memorizing is very different from the way classically trained people think about memorization. This guy wants to get better at memorizing, and there absolutely are strategies for doing that. I'm not a fan of memorization. One of these days I will make a video diving deep into all of that. But anybody who reads my post regularly on Reddit knows that I think that memorization is stupid and potentially damaging for a lot of musicians. It's not a practical or useful skill as a gigging musician. So that seems that probably comes at odds with what this guy's thinking about. He sees these people playing, they can just pick up, they can take a request and just play a song on the spot, or they seem to be able to play a whole lot of jazz repertoire without sheet music. But they are not memorizing the way that classical musicians are memorizing. Classical musicians are memorizing note for note. They're memorizing exactly which notes to play in a piece. Part of one of my problems with memorization is that a lot of these people are literally just learning it in their fingers. They are using procedural memory entirely for a whole piece of music, stringing together a whole bunch of little pieces of procedural memory to be able to execute that. They aren't even memorizing the music. I would say if you really did want to memorize, you'd use all these strategies that I have that I'm not going to go into, and I don't think you should use them, but essentially you should be able to transcribe that piece of music. You should be able to see it in your brain. If somebody gave you some blank manuscript paper as a classical musician and said, write out this piece of music you're playing and that you have memorized, you absolutely should have no problem writing it out note for note. You aren't relying on muscle memory and procedural memory of where your hands are at any given point. You actually know all the notes that you're playing. And that is how somebody should memorize it. When you're seeing a concert pianist playing, they absolutely could almost certainly do that. They know that piece inside out in a crazy way. But these like jazz and contemporary musicians, piano bar musicians, those kinds of people, people who are comping behind singers, people who are just playing playing by ear or playing from chords for musicals, they don't have any of that memorized. It's not memorized note for note. There's no note for note memorization. What they have is a collection of skills that let them just kind of make it up on the spot. I guess this kind of came up recently. The analogy that I would make is that you probably know the plot to a lot of stories, movies, books. You could probably tell me the plot of Harry Potter. You couldn't recite any of the books to me, but you could. You wouldn't be able to recite every line from the movies. You might be able to recite some of them, but you could give me a basic plot synopsis if you know the movie pretty well, or the books, or any other story. And that's basically what these people are doing. The thing is, they have developed their music language in such a way that they can tell that story and not have to use the exact words. It's the same idea. So you start understanding things like, your chord progressions and stuff like that. You'll start to realize that there aren't that many chord progressions. I mean, if you want to see a whole meme about it, go look up the 4 chords by Axis of Awesome. It's a joke way of showing just how common one chord progression is. And there are a handful of really common chord progressions, and you can also get away with reharmonizing. And I think in that song and some of the other ones where people do this sort of meme thing where they take a popular chord progression and show you a million songs that are over it. Some people might argue, oh, that's not exactly the chords that were in that one song. Okay, it doesn't matter. The issue is that there are so many substitutions. You could substitute 2 for 4, stuff like that. So it doesn't really matter that it's the exact same one. People still hear that song and go, oh, that's that song. It's recognizably that because functional relationships still exist. Whether it's 2 or 4, that's still a predominant chord, and so it still functions the same way. There are a lot of ways you can work with that. So you don't even need to know the exact chords. It's nicer if you do, but it's amazing how much you can just fake that. So you're just kind of extemporaneously telling the story. So what those people have, they don't have it memorized. They know how the song goes, just like you know how the plot of Harry Potter goes. They don't have to memorize any notes, and that means that for people with lots of different comping skills, you could pick a song, like Hey Jude, and they can kind of recognize the chord progression. They know how the song goes. They know the melody, so they can pluck it out by ear because they've practiced that skill. And now they could honestly play it in any key. They could play it in multiple styles. They could play a really straight ahead version of it, or like, I don't know, if they've got the chops for it, you could say, hey, can you play me a Latin version of Hey Jude? And they probably could do it because they know how the song goes. It's not memory. And it's also one of those things when I talk about how much I dislike memorization, people love to point out to me, oh, but all these jazz musicians and stuff, they have all this music memorized. They don't. They absolutely do not. I remember one of my jazz buddies, colleague, he plays, and he was talking about, man, this lady came in the other day, and she wanted me to play Misty in A or something like that, And he was like, he was just talking about how weird that was, because, normally you play Misty in E flat. But he can do it. Now, is that because he's practiced Misty in A? Has he just sat down and practiced Misty in every key? Does he know exactly what flourishes to use everywhere? No, he's practiced lots of jazz voicings in every key, and he knows how Misty goes. So if he's got a 2-5-1, it's like, okay, we're not playing the 2-5-1 in E flat, we're playing the 2-5-1 in A, and he just knows what that is. He knows how the melody goes, so he can just play it in whatever key. And I get that for people who lack that skill, it really is that sort of rest of the fucking owl situation where it is unimaginable to be able to just do that on the fly. If you don't have the ear training skills to play a melody, and you don't have the ear training skills to play chords, it seems like magic. People don't, I think the guy even mentioned in one of his replies that he doesn't get how people do that. Like he doesn't understand it. And like I had mentioned in another response very recently, the problem is that a lot of people who have these skills don't know how to explain these skills. They're very bad at teaching them. They don't understand how to tell you to work up to that skill. A lot of those people have been working on that skill for such a long time that they don't remember the learning of it, especially if they learned any of those skills when they were very young. Before about the age of 12, when you get abstract reasoning and you can actually think about those things, it's really hard to remember the processes that were involved in that before that time. I'm sure most people who can walk have no trouble walking and could not tell somebody how to walk. They couldn't teach somebody how to walk. And they couldn't tell you the process they went through of learning how to walk. Most people, sadly, couldn't teach somebody how to read. They spent years of not being able to read very well, learning the alphabet and then learning a handful of words and practicing reading really simple things and phrases and little children's books, years and years and years of that, and slowly building up until they were able to read. And they wouldn't be able to tell you how to do that if they hadn't spent any time thinking about it. And that's a problem that musicians have, is that they haven't spent enough time thinking about that, or it was so long in the past for them that they can't explain it. And that is a big problem in why these ear-playing musicians have trouble explaining a set of steps on how to get there. Now, I don't want to go into the whole thing, but I mean, more or less, I could explain those steps because I was a person who came from a classical background, and I was starting to learn piano basically at the same time, a newish instrument for me. at the same time that I was also having to suddenly learn all of these contemporary skills and teach myself jazz theory. So yeah, I do remember not having those skills and having to work on those skills and what it took to develop that set of skills in a very rough way, in my late 20s, when I was well aware of what was happening and why it was hard and what I made a lot of missteps and I did a lot of inefficient approaches because I didn't know how to approach it. But having gone through all that, I could give somebody a much better approach of what those baby steps are, how to start with some of those baby steps. Like I said, I don't want to get too far into it because it's too complicated. I'd have to make a video that's got some details on it. But the basics are, if you're playing chords, you learn some simple chord progressions. 1, 4, and 5 chords. You understand the chords that are going to come up a lot, which is it's going to be 1, 4, and 5, and then 6 comes up more after that, and then so and so on. And these chord progressions, you practice them in every key. You get so used to using them and hearing them, and then you start listening for bass lines. Bass lines will really give you a hint of what the chords are because you'll be able to hear those bass lines. On the melody side, it's an issue of being able to hear sort of the color or flavor of scale degrees within a melody in a key, because they have different sets of tension. If it's a 1, 3, or 5, that's a very home-rested sound. If it's a 4 or a 7, it's not, because those really want to move by a half step to one of those home-feeling notes. 4 wants to go to 3, 7 wants to go up to 1. They want to go there bad. And the other notes have their own tendencies. 2 and 6 also have tendencies. There's too much to get into, but it's not magic. It's really not magic. It is not an innate skill. It is not a thing that you can't learn. It's not an either or. That's another problem. People think that it's an either or. They either can sight read or they can play by ear. It's not. It's just that once you've spent all that time working on, reading, the people who come from a reading background, they spend years reading, just like I was talking about reading your language. People do that with music. They spent years learning how to read, but then after 2 weeks of trying to train their ear, they give up because it's like, why am I not making 3 or 4 years of progress in 2 weeks? It's going to be the same process, and you have to start in the same place. You have to start from the beginning, and people are often unwilling to do that. Nobody wants to go out and try to transcribe Twinkle Twinkle to practice their ear playing. But that's kind of where you would have to start. You still have to start with the really, really basic vocabulary and work your way up. Just like you did with sight reading, you didn't start with blazing arpeggios and big left-hand jumps. This isn't, I won't even say that I'm super fantastic at this skill. There was a time when I was better at playing by ear and doing these kinds of things. I've noticed lately that it's rusty because a lot of the work that I have steered myself towards these days is way more reading reliant. And so I focus a lot more of my practice when I have it on reading skills, which are also not super strong, but they've gotten so much better because I figured out how to work on reading. But yeah, I tend to focus my efforts on the skills that are being used the most in the jobs that I am currently taking. And these days I just am doing less of the real on-the-spot sort of ear-playing stuff. I'll probably never have interest in doing piano bar things. I've heard a lot of people tell me I should get into it because I have the ability, the basic ability to do it. But I'm not that interested. I found some very relatively consistent work, and my reputation has kind of driven me towards these kinds of jobs that are a little more consistent than some of the one-off gigging situations. So anyway, but no, I mean, it's absolutely a skill where you can get better at whatever skill. And, even though I'm not a master of any of these skills, I'm good enough to know exactly where you need to keep going from there. And I know I could get better at doing that, and I would know how to practice it. And so it makes me sad and frustrated when people think that they can't. They think that it's an either or skill, or it's a skill that people have to be naturally talented to get. I got it. I got it coming from a classical background. I got enough of it to have a taste to know, oh, I could get really good at this. if that's where if I put all my eggs in that basket. So, and you don't have to give up any of your other skills. I mean, they will get rusty. Any skill you're not working on, like I said, my ear playing has gotten rusty, but it's also one of those things where if I started working on it, it comes back really quickly when I need it. So just know that you can pick up any of these skills. Like it's doable. And also know that those people aren't memorizing the way that you think they're memorizing. That's the important thing to know. That the issue is they know the language. They can speak the language of music. They aren't just regurgitating the notes off of a page, because a classical musician, they shouldn't, but they can get away with knowing nothing about theory. They can have no idea what they're playing functionally. But people who are playing in these styles, they absolutely do know the language. They understand what's happening. They understand chord progressions. They understand a lot of those things that help them be able to just tell the story in their own words, kind of on the spot. So, I just encourage people to realize that you can do whatever these things are you want to do. You're not locked by some lack of natural talent, and it's not magical. So, anyway, I'm gonna stop rambling and go do something else. Okay, I need to work. Bye.